Welcome to IoT All the Things, Season 2, Episode 5. We're going to dive into a lot of great stuff. I'm Wale.
I'm Rudy, and today we're joined by a special guest, Patrick from CloudRail. This isn't your granddad's IoT. Today we are diving into Industrial IoT. Gone are the days of floppy disks and mainframes, and say hello to the world of pluggable protocols, edge gateways, and data acquisition. Let's get plugged in for IoT All the Things.
Hi, I'm Wale Oledehin, SA Leader for IoT.
And I am Rudy Chetty, a Senior Solutions Architect with AWS. And today we're joined by Patrick. Patrick, you want to say hello?
Hello out there, and thanks a lot for having me. I'm Patrick, and I'm CTO and co-founder of CloudRail.
Patrick, it's awesome to have you on. And we also have you dialing in from the other side of the pond, right? You are over in Germany at the moment.
I am in the beautiful Mannheim, city of a lot of inventions, by the way.
Yeah, I am jealous because it's still sunlight for you, and it's like dinner time, but you still have like all the sun out.
Yeah, it's almost 8, and I think it's still going to be sunny for half an hour to an hour more.
Well, I'm glad you're here. I'm glad you're here and taking your nightcap with us. I know we've got some really, really great topics to talk about, especially some recent launches and then a ton of stuff around industrial. So really excited to dive in with you, Patrick, all around CloudRail and all the stuff on industrial. It's going to be awesome. For those that haven't joined the show before, we are going to dive into some industrial use cases, but we always like to start with some of the hot topics. If you are familiar with AWS IoT, we've had some really cool launches. We launched fleet provisioning. So this allows you to onboard devices onto AWS IoT. You can use fleet provisioning. You can use some of the other stuff we've had before, like just-in-time registration, just-in-time provisioning, just making it flexible for customers to add devices to the cloud. Also, we had some updates on Greengrass. Next version of Greengrass is launched as well. And what's really cool with having Patrick here is we're able to dive in a little bit more about how Greengrass ties into industrial. So that's going to be super exciting. So without further ado, Patrick, I'd love to just start picking your brain about like industrial and maybe even, as Rudy said, like industrial has changed so much. Like, how are you seeing this in CloudRail? How are you seeing customers kind of think about this space differently?
Yeah, I mean, industrial still is a industry that is rather slow to change. I mean, it's just because, once a machine stops, that's just burning so much money, right? So people are very careful of adding new tech to it and making it maybe more error prone than it was before, right? So that's one of the things where actually we tie into very well, but we get into that later. So people are now starting to open up to, cloud applications and all the new tech, especially around edge computing as well. It's still very early, so we see a lot of people do proof of concepts first, and still being in that proof of concept stage for the most part. But people also here in Europe, even though Germany is usually a bit more conservative, but they do start to experiment with cloud solutions and getting their machines hooked up to cloud platforms like AWS.
It'd be cool to know a little bit more about CloudRail too. So like you see customers start doing POCs. I'm assuming you then say, hey, how can we make this easier? So like, can you give us a little bit of background of how you what CloudRail kind of does, what your thinking is in terms of like the industrial space?
Sure. So we actually started out as a, classic software company. So we used to connect multiple softwares with a previous product that we had. So it was more like connecting applications and cloud platforms. And now we moved into the space of, actually connecting machines and connecting hardware to the cloud, which we eventually found is the more challenging thing to do, just because, there's just a huge gap between the software side, which is rapidly changing, right? You have new releases out every week probably, and on the hardware side, on the industrial side, usually machines are up and running for, I don't know, 20, 50 years. And getting that kind of aligned is a real challenge. And we thought, well, that's something that we have to attack, and we have to attack it from the software side, actually the side that is responsible in most cases to make IoT happen, right? So the only value you get from IoT is when you do stuff with the data you accumulate. So we figured, hey, there needs to be a simple solution for the target audience software, the target audience IT, right, to get the data out of the shop floor and into the systems that they can work with.
Yeah, I think that's super interesting too, because as we think about the software world, and it's kind of like that, you hear IT, OT, hardware and software, like how do these two worlds kind of merge together? You hinted on it a bit there too as well. Like you have a software developer or a data scientist that, are used to a certain set of tools. And then you have kind of the process side of it, which is which hardware to use, how you configure it, how does it plug into all of the other sensors that are available on a shop floor. It seems like you're kind of trying to figure out how to maybe make it a little bit easier for software people to understand the components of hardware enough to get the data out. And then same on a hardware side, how can you make it easy enough to get the software developers access to the data they need?
Yeah, I mean it's really a clash of worlds, right? We have that fast moving IT world and the well, I guess it's still to be decided who comes out ahead, but I think in regards to IoT, it's pretty fair to say that the IT side and the software side will actually take over most of it. So that's also why we say it has to be, they have to have tools, they have to have industrial grade tools. In particular, to go to the shop floor, get the data out of there, without them, first of all, having to be physically present, and second of all, having to have the knowledge about the protocols involved. So
it just sounds like you're saying, or all I'm hearing is developers are important. If you're a developer, you are well needed here in this space, because we need to code, guys. I mean,
there's absolutely nothing that could be better than having to have more developers working on IoT solutions, especially, right? And working on the fun part, which is building the applications, not getting the data, because that's probably not the thing you would like to work on, since it's the annoying stuff that no one actually values. The value comes from the application. So
yeah, I think, Patrick, I think it's super cool. I'd actually love to, even though we got into the software side, I'd love to get a sense of some of the hardware and like how you configure the hardware, what kind of hardware components you see. So I know you have some hardware kind of readily available to share with us in terms of the look and feel. So that'd be cool to check it out.
Okay.
In that case, right? So, of course, if you want data in the cloud, you first of all need to start with sensors, stuff that can sense, a supported portfolio of about 12,000 different sensors from about 200 different vendors. So we basically work with the industrial grade hardware. That's the kind of sensors that are installed on the machines today already, right? It's not that we're coming with, what happens in a lot of POCs is that people development boards like Raspberry Pis, Arduinos, and have the sensors that they can connect to those to build a POC, which works for a PLC, but then you start to have to transition into production where, that, let's call it consumer grade without, devaluing it, but for those use cases in production, it's not going to happen if I go to the person who's responsible for the machine's operations and tell him, hey, let me add that Raspberry Pi with those sensors over there. He's probably going to look at me very strange and not going to be, very happy about it. So, but if you come with sensors that they already know and that they have worked with like, for decades, actually, they're more than happy to add them because they know they are quality sensors and they know that they can trust the companies behind it, right? So that's kind of the starting point, and that's also where we wanted to start, right? Is really at the base where, where the OT is today, which should make it easier to kind of get the worlds together. So that's the starting point. So we have different sensors. They range from all kinds of things, from temperature to distance sensors to more complicated sensors like vibration sensors or even RFID readers and writers. We also have a few actors in there, so flashy lights are always, a thing to have. So they are actually also supported to, be controlled via the cloud after all. Those sensors are usually hooked up to so-called I/O modules, right? They kind of act as sensor hubs, which are more close to the machines itself or to the sensor. You can usually add like 4 or 8 sensors to those I/O modules. And those in turn are then connected, in our case, to what we call the CloudRail box, which is that beautiful gray and orange piece of hardware over there. And
nice.
it's it's really a plug and play gateway. So all the supported sensors and devices from the OT are automatically discovered from the gateway. So I just have to, have someone install it, connect the box to the internet, and I'm good to go to hook up my data to AWS, for instance, or the cloud in general. So that's kind of the basic setup. So in today's world, we mostly see people going with secondary sensors, as we call it. So they don't want to touch their production system yet. So usually you have the PLC, which is already hooked up to some of the sensors. And, they want that to operate, right? So even if we're not actively doing something, that could interfere with the sensors, they are usually happier if you just add a second sensor right next to the first one and, get the data out of there. So that's kind of the situation we're in, right? So we have the box connected to I/O modules, which in turn are connected to the different sensors. I guess before I talk more about, the hardware side, let's jump into what we call our device management platform or device management cloud, where as the software developer, I can, after all, configure all those boxes that I have in the field. And again, that happens pretty much from anywhere in the world. So I can just sign up. All the boxes have a serial number on the side, which allows you to hook them up to your account. And yeah, as I said, you can see them. You can see the status from anywhere in the world. Are those boxes actually online? Are they offline? What's going on with them. And in addition to that, you can actually also monitor the connected devices. So we will see that in a second. But if I actually want to make a connection, I just select one of the boxes, hit new connection, and the device management cloud will connect down to the hardware, to our box, and just ask, hey, what's actually connected. Right now, there's nothing connected at first, so we just add one of those I/O modules, and as I said, it will automatically be discovered and be available in here in just a few seconds. And those can be on factory settings. It has already found a tower light. And if we connect a new sensor to it, it will also be automatically picked up and just show up in a few seconds. So that can actually be done either live, right? Or if you have someone install it beforehand. But yeah, so it just appears, you take it, hit next step, choose an interval. So how often do you want that sensor to send its data into AWS? In that case, we can just do 2 seconds. We go next and we select the source that we want to connect to. In that case, we choose IoT Core. We give the device a name. Those should be very descriptive, by the way. Hit create. And what we do in the background is the whole device provisioning process. So we create the device on the customer's AWS account in IoT Core. We download the credentials back to the box, and the box makes the connection into AWS. So all I get now is pretty much the information about the device I just created. So what we have is the topic for which the data is actually coming in. And we get a very detailed schema of, how the data will look like for the specific sensor. Having units in here, having min-max values if applicable, and just the whole structure is being described here. as well as, just a little sample of how the data could look like. Obviously, in that case, the calculation is not, not real, but, it's just a data sample. And if we want to go into our AWS account, so we can just copy that topic, head over into AWS IoT Core, into that little test functionality, which I guess you all know. Copy the topic in here and hit subscribe. And we see the data coming in just like that. So there was no coding involved on the hardware side, right? So no one has to actually, code something on the gateway itself. You just plug it in together, go through that here, and you're up and have your data into AWS at that point.
That's really cool. Just to recap all those components, so have it all oriented. You have the sensors on the edge. Those sensors integrate with the CloudRail box, and you have a set of modules that help do the conversion between sensors, your box, and eventually AWS IoT Core in the cloud.
Yeah, they kind of take the sensor data and relay them to a field bus, as they call it in the automation world, right? Where we pick those up from the, from standard Ethernet connection and, transform the data. We just get binary data from those modules basically, and then transform it into the, let's call it beautiful JSON structure that we extract from it and send into AWS.
Also, well, I know we've got probably maybe a couple questions on the Twitch chat, but curious from the group of as you're digging into all these components, what things are coming up as interest.
Well, let's see. What questions do we have here? Look, there was a question about, how does industrial IoT deal with all the many legacy protocols? And I have mentioned Sitewise to the person who commented, but how do you guys actually deal with that at CloudRail, Patrick?
It always depends what you call legacy, right? Since, for the software side, there's probably a lot of legacy out there. But the way we see it in most cases is that it's more expensive to touch the legacy protocols in a lot of cases than to actually, switch over to kind of the supported sensor base that we have, for instance, right? Or to a protocol that is easier convertible into cloud solutions. Obviously, if you have the option of integrating against a legacy protocol or writing it from scratch yourself, then it's not much of a choice, because it's still going to take a lot of time and money. So for us, we see in a lot of cases that if they try, or if our customers try to get the data out of legacy protocols, they are still cheaper with buying new sensors that do the same thing and hooking them up to our box than they are when they try to integrate with the legacy protocols.
Yeah, it's one of those interesting, when I think legacy, Patrick, you kind of nailed it. It's just there's just, these live for so long that legacy can mean something slightly different. It could be I Love Lucy legacy, or Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles on a Saturday morning kind of legacy. So you do have these options of, do you buy new because it's going to be easier to do, or do you get a standard like an OPC UA, Modbus, all of these other ones, Ethernet, so that you might have different paths to integrate depending on where you are in that journey?
I actually feel like it's not so much about deciding between, fully investing into legacy protocols than to switch over, right? I think you can leave the existing systems in place, right? There's no harm done. In a lot of cases, you still need additional sensor data or additional data for your IoT applications anyway, right? Because, machines might not have the data that you need for the use case, because they were, outfitted with sensors that work for the process, right? Not necessarily for analyzing the IoT data.
I love, Patrick, just to dive into, you mentioned the configuration aspects and device management and plugging in sensors. It looks like magic, but I know there's software behind that magic. So how is all that configuration done? You mentioned Sitewise, we talked a little bit about things, Greengrass and Core, but how does all of this kind of come into, existence, so to speak?
Yeah. So actually the central place is really the device management cloud that we have, right? That's kind of the place where, all the different ends come together. So the device management cloud itself is actually also hosted on AWS. And from there, we connect directly into the IoT core of our own AWS account in order to talk to the different gateways that are out there. So every gateway shipped from us comes with a pre-installed certificate that can, connect to the IoT core of the device management in order to make that initial, secure communication happen in the first place. And through that channel, we're then able to, have that communication go on and exchange the data, where the box gets the data of, which IO modules are out there, are in the network, which can be found and configured. So that's what the gateway knows, right? It knows what kind of sensors it has and the different IO modules. And on the other hand, we have the device management cloud, which then knows, first of all, where you want to connect to. So as a customer, right, you link your AWS account or your Sidewise account, whatever it will be, to the device management so that we can make that, seamless provisioning of devices happen. And that's kind of the split that we have. That configuration is then shared back to the box to make that, direct MQTT connection happen and actually exchange the data with the customer's AWS account and not ours, right? Because it's not in our intentions, and nor is it in the customers, right? That all the data goes through our servers and then is relayed to theirs. It just doesn't make sense. So it's really always a connection that is directly from the gateway into the AWS account of the customer then. So that's kind of the basic setup, right? And from there, you can then choose different targets for the data. So what we've seen before is the IoT core, for instance, but we also support Greengrass as a target, as well as Sidewise, for instance. So our goal is really to integrate as deep as possible into the different cloud platforms so that the customer can get the most benefit out of, that plug and play approach, right? Because it makes it easier if I get my data directly into Sidewise than having to go through IoT core and then forward it to Sidewise, right? So all the little steps that you have to take, to take away and make us as simple as possible, right, for the end user.
Awesome. So it seems like you have this onboarding process, which allows you to take your certificate through an exchange, have the data go to the customer's accounts, and then at that point, you have the integration with the Sidewise or a Greengrass. It'd be really cool just to dive into how those data flows actually look. So just seeing how that CloudRail experience comes from the configuration portions to the Sidewise and other.
Exactly. So we're back here, and quick note to Greengrass before. So as you can see, there's the disable Greengrass in that case, but usually enable Greengrass setting where you can connect the box to one of your existing Greengrass cores, or alternatively, we can also again take away the whole provisioning of the Greengrass core and do it automatically using the API credentials that the customer provides us beforehand. But yeah, so that's kind of the setup for Greengrass, right? We just quickly hook it up there and have it ready. So if we want to connect to Sidewise, we basically go back to new connection. We connect down to the box again. We select the temperature sensor. We go next. Yes, we know it's already connected to something else. And we just give it another interval. In that case, it doesn't have to be the same one as before, so we can choose 1 second. And again, here you would see IoT Core where we went before, but IoT Sidewise is the one that we're going to go with. So you could also use IoT Greengrass here, which would then create a device that directly sends the data into the local Greengrass instance on the box. So it would not go into AWS actually on the cloud portion, right? It would just go into the local instance. So yeah, same thing as before. We give it a name. As you can see, I'm very good at descriptive names, by the way.
A very lovely name, I must say.
And
pronounce that in German.
Just like that, we've again just connected it to the cloud. We get similar information as before. The only difference is that we've actually taken care of a little bit more than just hooking up the sensor to IoT Core, right? So we've also created a model for that sensor. So if we go in here, we basically see this is the temperature sensor model. And it has all the measurement definitions already in here. So we have the different process values, and we have the two strings that we get. So all of this is pretty much set up, from our side using the information that we have about the sensors. So if we go back into the assets, we should also see exactly our beautiful device created in here. And also, if we go into measurements here, we can basically just see, the latest value of that specific sensor or asset. But that alone, since Sidewise is kind of more for actually making visualizations, we can go into the portal section. I'm just going to go quick here because I'm not, I don't want to go into setting up portals and stuff, but it's pretty much an area where you can create your own dashboards and visualize the parts of the assets that you want to see and that you want to have, on top of your mind. But we can quickly step into the asset library, into the device that we've created, and we can already see here that, the data is actually coming in live right here. Exactly. So as quick as you can actually hook it up to IoT Core and see the data come in, you can also hook it up to Sidewise, get the whole asset model created for you and, have it visualized. Obviously that needs a bit of tweaking for your situation and probably multiple sensors, but it's really not much more effort than actually just, getting the raw data in there.
This is really cool because Patrick, just in a little bit of time, you've shown how to get site-wise configured or Greengrass, how to get the data routed. And even we see customers kind of struggle with the schematics of the model, right? It's like, okay, is this a Boolean? Is this a data point? Is it floating? Is it long? What's the cadence that I get it in? So it seems like you're able to do all of that from the dashboard, really.
If you've done it before, it might not take as much time, right? But it still is effort that you can just save by using our solution, right?
Yeah, totally. I think it's interesting because you get a fast POC. You're able to do industrial at the speed of consumer, right? Like you're able to get people up and running in a secure way at a scale that is, I think, always challenging in this kind of brownfield space.
We've got a question for, I think it's actually it is for Patrick. So someone asks, DLS 1618, are the boxes initially added to your CloudRail account and then transferred to the customer's AWS account? I mean, can you go into that a bit more?
Strictly speaking, all the CloudRail boxes are things on our AWS account, right? Because that's where the device management cloud is hosted. So there's one MQTT connection going from the box to our device management cloud, and that is by design, right? By factory. And then after that, though, they're hooked up to the customer's cloud, right? So the customer provides us with the API credentials to make the provisioning process happen, and then get the certificates to their AWS account on the box and set up multiple additional MQTT connections for the customer's data.
It's great to hear you talk about how you guys are shaping the landscape and changing the way that people can actually get sensors, get data out of the sensors and put it into their accounts to get the information they need or they maybe previously didn't have access to because it was in and I'll say this again, legacy protocols or older protocols that might be more difficult to get data out of in the past.
And it's just the beginning. I'm pretty sure about that. So I think we've gone quite far already, but it's definitely just the beginning. There will be more protocols and more types of devices that will be compatible after all. But it's always about that user experience for us at least.
Patrick, this has been awesome. I'm glad we were able to, through the power of the internet, bring us all together, connected to one CloudRail box, having a great talk about industrial. So really, really appreciate your time.
Thanks a lot for having me. I enjoyed it a lot as well. And I'm happy to have shared the last, sun rays here from Germany with you guys. And
Awesome. Well, I guess we will sign this out. Join us for our next episode in a couple of weeks. We'll have some great topics again, more on IoT. So I am Wale again, SA leader, and Rudy.
I am Rudy. I am the Senior Solutions Architect on this stream, and we'll say thanks for watching IoT All the Things.
The things. We nailed it. Thanks, Patrick.